In the Persian Gulf, situated in between the independent nations of Saudi Arabia and Iran, tensions were high. The Iraq-Iran war had recently ravaged the area, and many nations were becoming increasingly aggressive and unstable. With the mounting debt of Iraq, the oil-rich nation of Kuwait seemed like an easy target to the country's leader, Saddam Hussein. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait and were immediately condemned and asked to surrender. In January of '91, after Iraq's refusal, the war began. Canada joined a UN coalition of forces that included 27 other countries and the United States of America to support Kuwait. This was the first time since Korea in 1950 that the UN would lead a task force of nations against an aggressor. In Canada, the Conservative government, led by Brian Mulroney, was reluctant to put Canadian troops against the Iraqi forces. In the end, Canadian troops accounted for only 3,700 of the 500,000 troops of the coalition forces, none of which were ground troops. This is primarily because Canada did not have a very high support of the war.
The unrelenting sun beats down on your shoulders like a heated lead weight. You climb the glistening rungs of the ladder. Lowering yourself into your high-tech office, you rhythmically execute your start checklist. You tell yourself, this is the real deal. You've been trained by the best. Now, it's your time to prove them right. With your target in sight, you fire.
Canadian CF-18 jets completed over 56 bombing attacks in Operation Desert Storm. This conflict led to use of new technologies such as laser-guided bombs and missiles and high-tech communication systems. This created even bigger emphasis on air support and drew the name Operation Desert Storm as a nickname. Iraqi troops retreated on February 26th and were extensively bombed on a road which became known as the Highway of Death. 2 days later, President Bush declared a ceasefire. The Gulf War ultimately changed world affairs. Moving forward, the United Nations was to take a much more active and militant role in keeping the peace. U.S. President George H.W. Bush's New World Order would involve much more peacemaking than peacekeeping. This would come to have implications on our nation. As a member of the United Nations and NATO, Canada would move forward with this new view of world affairs. It played an obvious role on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as the ongoing conflict in Syria, in which these practices, established after the end of the Gulf War, are still being used in the UN today. This model created the situation in which we are living in today. After the Gulf War, Canada remained as peacekeepers.